All right, so in the second segment of this video, I am going to tell you a little bit about how to identify pikas and distinguish them from other species that you might encounter in the talus. So let's go ahead and get started. In terms of physical attributes, pikas again are about the size and shape of a baked potato. And a couple of key attributes that you can use to identify pikas is that they've got these round Mickey Mouse ears with this white ring around the ear. And this sometimes will make it actually much easier to be able to identify the species, because you'll see that other species that have big ears don't have this white ring around the ear. They're about 6 to 8 inches in length, about 4 to 6 ounces in weight. And another key thing that you'll notice is that they don't have a visible tail. So if you see an animal quickly scurrying through the rock side and it has a tail, then it's not a pika. Finally, one other rule of thumb is that pikas do not typically sit on their hind feet and eat food with their front paws in the way that squirrels or chipmunks do. So if you see an animal sitting there on its hind feet and eating with its front paws, it's most likely not a pika. Pikas are not equally likely to be found in all areas of the talus. We oftentimes find them in these edges of the talus, sort of close to the this abundant meadow vegetation. Each pika defends a territory that's roughly 12 meters in radius. So, in a site like this, you can see there would be, maybe this many pikas kind of living along the edge. They do occasionally venture or even sometimes build their hay pile up in these larger inaccessible areas, but these are not going to be areas that you're going to want to spend a lot of extra time looking for pikas, because there's just not enough food to support them there. And again, rock size about basketball to microwave. In terms of signs of pika presence, you can identify them by sight or calls. A lot of times, if you're sitting there looking for pikas, you'll be able to see, what you'll see is first just movement. You'll see an animal moving along the talus, or sometimes in the late summer when they're building their hay piles, you'll just see a wildflower bouncing along the talus, and it can be inferred that usually wildflowers don't do that sort of thing, and so it's probably a pika. So scan the talus where you hear calls, listen for their distinct calls. Again, I'll play for you a short call. And the long call, typically only made by males. And once again, notice that in the long call, you've got these trilly notes that sort of slow down, and then you've got those descending short call notes at the end that are characteristic of the long call. In terms of indirect sign that you might find, you may encounter pika hay piles, which are going to look like big piles of vegetation in the rocks. Some pikas build their hay piles down under a rock in a way that you can't really see it. Some of them just make a big pile that's visible from the open. So it's kind of a personality sort of trait. In addition, if you're sort of poking around and looking under rocks, you may also find pikas scat. They have the cutest scat of any mammal. And interestingly, like all lagomorphs, pikas actually produce 2 different types of scat. So they're fecal pellets. These are sort of your regular run-of-the-mill, I'm done with this and leaving it behind sort of scat. And these are just about exactly the size and shape of peppercorns. A fun thing to do if you're leading trips is to bring a couple peppercorns in your pocket. Show your volunteers when you find the scat, and then you can pull out a peppercorn and show it to them, and then put it in your mouth and tell them they can also test it by taste. They fall for it every time. It's very amusing, but don't do it if it's not uncomfortable or if you don't like eating peppercorns. And be sure to tell them also not to eat scat. The other types of scat that you might encounter is a second type of scat that pikas produce. It's called a fecal pellet. And honestly, I know it's disgusting, but this stuff looks exactly like black toothpaste. But it's actually a super highly nutritious, and pikas will consume it, or sometimes they'll store it for later. And so sometimes if you look through a hay pile, you'll find this stuff sort of caked on all of these different plants. So what's going on here is that pikas have a large pouch called the cecum that is basically sort of a pouch that hangs off of their large intestine. And the cecum is full of gut microbes that help pikas to digest the really high fiber foods and the plants that they eat. But the cecum is located after the small intestine, where those liberated nutrients could be absorbed. And so what they do is they squeeze out the contents of the cecum, and sometimes it will go out one door and straight into the other. And then, like I said, sometimes they'll store it for later. So that's another really great, gross, but fun fact that everybody likes to hear. Okay, other mammals that you may see in here, this will vary geographically by where you are, but what I've tried to do is sort of put together a list of the most common kinds of mammals that you might see or hear in the Rocky Mountains and in Colorado. So these are 4 different species of squirrels. Yes, it's true, marmots are actually large ground squirrel, and that both make calls and sometimes live in or near talus habitats. Couple of key things. First of all, you'll notice that the chipmunk and the golden-mantled ground squirrel have stripes and quite small ears compared to pikas. The pine squirrel has this sort of dark coloring on top and this big bushy tail. Pine squirrels and chipmunks also oftentimes live in trees. Pikas do not climb trees. So if you see an animal in a tree, it is almost certainly not a pika. It's probably one of these types of squirrels. Golden-mantled ground squirrels and marmots don't climb trees, but you may see them in the talus. These guys, again, have stripes. Marmots are much bigger, so they're about the size of a house cat. And you'll notice that their calls are a little bit different. So here's the chipmunk call. It's a little bit more kind of chirpy. Here's the golden-mantled ground squirrel. And again, you'll notice that could potentially, if you were like, really, really wanted to see or hear a pika, you might potentially think maybe that was a pika long call, but you don't have that slowing down of the chirps and then those descending short call notes at the end. Here's the pine squirrel. Again, much chatterier, and usually they call from a tree, which pikas don't climb. And then the marmot makes a little bit more of kind of a whistle or a, more chirpy call. All right. You may also sometimes hear bird calls that could be easily mistaken for pikas. So the American pipit. The brown-capped rosy finch. And the white-tailed. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, these don't sound at all like pikas. I totally got this. But I just want to point out that sometimes if you're out there and you've been looking for pikas all day and you're like, I really want to see a pika so that I can make an observation on my app, it sometimes can be really easy to convince yourself in the field. So it's good to sort of be aware of like what these things sound like. And if you want to go back and rewatch this recording so you can check those out, or just look up, Google these calls, you can find recordings on the internet. So I want to play a pika long call one more time for you, just so that you can really hear the difference. And as you listen to this, really pay attention to those like chirpy notes, and then the slowing down of the pace, and then the descending long call notes at the end. All right. Congratulations, you've made it through the training. As soon as you finish watching all of the rest of the videos in this training, you'll be ready to go out and lead your own trips and identify pikas in the field. And hopefully you will see this along with the training materials, but I just want to also point out, we do have an evaluation and a survey for you to take. This will help us to track both your participation, the number of volunteers you expect to be able to reach. And as soon as you complete this evaluation, we will email you the links to all of the materials that you'll need. If you are attending this or watching this as a group, please make sure that each person completes this individually. And so you'll each receive the email with all of the links that you need need to go out, plan trips, and conduct surveys with the app. Thanks again for your interest. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions and have fun.